Today I'm chatting with Paul Weinberg, photographer, archivist, curator, and one of his latest projects, which is the digitization of the archive of the Lesotho photographer, Mohlouoa Ramakatane. Hi, Paul. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham.
Perhaps to begin, Paul, maybe give us some background of your photography career and what has led you now to focus on the archival aspect of photography.
Well, I began tripping and falling, over 40 years ago as a photographer. And in that period, it was very much still the golden period of photojournalism. So, I was able to earn a living as a photojournalist working for various newspapers, magazines. And then, after 1994 in South Africa, the interest in South Africa as a news and world story kind of began to wane. But I continued to find work, particularly in the NGO sector. And then by the early 2000s, the bottom had really pretty much fallen out of the world of photojournalism. At the same time, a lot of my colleagues had kind of moved into the fine art world, and I was sort of watching this with interest and doing my best to try and find a way in. But I made a decision in the early 2000s to take a break from photojournalism and photography, actually, to Duke University, and I got a master's degree. I was lucky to get a job at UCT, and I worked there as a curator for 10 years, basically building the archive of South African photography to the best I could.
It must be really exciting as an archivist to find a body of work that isn't in the public domain. I suppose Vivian Maier is such a good example of someone who went from obscurity to become an icon of the art world. How did you discover Ramakatane's work, and what were your initial thoughts on it?
I got to hear of Ramakatane's archive through people who were working with the Lesotho National Museum. His name came up as a very important photographer from Lesotho. We made contact with Mr. Ramakatane, and it transpired that his archive was very kind of endangered, vulnerable, fragile, and actually part of it had burnt down in an outhouse. And so it was the right time to digitize his archive. It took about a year, and sadly in that time, Mr. Ramakatane passed away. He slots into the sort of genre of vernacular photographer. There are many photographers like him in Africa who set up these studios and then, just pass on. And families generally just throw the work away. Or outside collectors come and buy the material, and we lose, the heritage that way as well. And of course, I didn't know the depths of his archive. I got a sort of sense of it. And interestingly enough, he was sort of more interested in his connection to the royal family and how he had photographed them for many years. But actually, the gold of his archive, for me, is really in the studio work.
I think in order to understand Ramakatane's work, one has to have a picture of what Lesotho was like in the 60s when he started his studio. Lesotho is a tiny country landlocked by South Africa, and there's very much a big brother feel to Lesotho versus South Africa. And also, perhaps you can elaborate on the migrant labor situation and how so many people within Lesotho are dependent on working in South Africa, particularly in the gold mines.
Interestingly, Ramakatane himself had gone to South Africa to finish his schooling. And he came back to Lesotho in the early 60s. And just around the time of independence of Lesotho, he set up the studio in Maseru.
Which is the capital.
Yeah, which then became a conduit for most people in Lesotho to come and have a photograph taken. And I think literally thousands and thousands of people, came through his studio. When you said earlier that South Africa kind of has a dominant relationship or big brother with regard to Lesotho, you're quite right. I mean, Lesotho kind of is a dependent state that got most of its income from workers going to work on the gold mines. And that had happened over many, many decades since the emergence of gold mines in South Africa. And so you had this culture of migrant labor. And with it, obviously, came the relationship of the worker to the family and the relationship of the worker to his own culture. And what you see right through the Ramakatane archive is this kind of symbiotic relationship. And while often it's not stated, you're pretty sure that this person posing with a Lesotho blanket and a child and a hat and with his wife is a mine worker. And then, at times you also see clearly girlfriends, wives who are sending pictures, posing in a particular way, sometimes quite provocatively, pictures back to the migrant worker on the Witwatersrand. Ramakatane is able to have the sense of trust, and people obviously felt comfortable in his presence.
All art appreciation is obviously subjective, and Ramakatane's work has such a depth of information to draw on. There's the cultural, the traditional aspect. How did you go about distilling this work in a way that makes it more understandable by audiences that don't live in this region of the world? In the case of Vivian Meyer's work, the context of the photographs is immediately understandable to, say, Europeans or Americans. As someone who is looking at archival work within Africa and South Africa, I'm sure you are continually sensitive to the fact that you don't want to put this work out into the world in a way that is possibly seen to be ethnographic or exotic, that it could be appreciated by audience in its fullest form.
Oh, that's a very complex and difficult question. But, it always kind of comes back to the same thing. What really has power and what works as a photograph. So the narrative of Ramakatane, is really about his images that work, and, just also being aware of framing him not in this sort of exotique and the sort of this marginal photographer, but someone who actually has a body of work that speaks universally. And I think this, the great thing about his body of work is that it has such incredible diversity and depth. What I like about, the Vivian Meyer archive, and Disfarmer was another one that was found, is that these are the not expected voices that we engage with in world photography. And we're sort of so used to sort of seeing the name brands and the more sort of famous photographers. And yet these other photographers come through the woodwork. And that's what I really like about Ramakatane's contribution to vernacular photography.
His commercial studio setting has definitely resulted in portraits that are very different from, say, what a visiting photojournalist would have produced.
Definitely. I mean, there's a spontaneous element to Ramakatane's work, which I find just very heartwarming. He himself never saw this particular body of work as important. It was just sort of a kind of a cash cow that sort of, continued a flow of income, and it was one of the ways that he could survive. When I did speak to him a few times, he would talk to me about his photographs of the royal family and other work. And he saw that as a sort of marker in his career, but actually he didn't sort of see this as that valuable or important.
A theme I noticed in his work was the bridging of the gap between the traditional cultural values and the desire of people to embrace the modern urban chic.
There was this crossover, which I think makes it just all the more interesting. There was quite a bit of prompting on his part. He got people to like pose and strut because he was sort of aware of that genre.
I think his straightforward approach allows us to read so much more into the personalities of his subject. They have a sort of naive simplicity to them, which reminds me of August Sander. They both provided a record of a time and the people in the area in which he photographed.
Very much, and to that I would add, sort of a kind of access to the ordinary, and that's the strength of Sander, in that he looked at a cross section of life between the wars in Germany, and those portraits are sort of very revealing of Germany as a nation under some kind of transition. And the same with Lesotho. I mean, you get such a wide range and a diversity of people who coming to present themselves to Ramakatane and to the camera, and expressing who they think they are in the world. There isn't that sense of obvious manipulation to create a particular aesthetic, which Diane Arbus was very much aware of, being, right in the slot of the sort of sophisticated first world sensibility of where documentary photography and fine art photography were moving and coinciding. With Ramakatane, it's much more about a sort of a naive expression of each sitter, and giving them the space to be that. And it's really telling the story of ordinary people and their aspirations, desires, and where they want to be.
I think we'll start to wrap up, but I just wanted to ask how you see your role moving forward with regards to Ramakatane's work. I know that you've digitized a large collection of his work. Are you going to continue exposing it, or do you feel that your role is to put it out there and now it's over to someone else to pick it up and run with it?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. I mean, I see my role at the PLP much more about sort of offering this material for others to take up. And in the case of Mr. Ramakatane, I think I've delivered, a body of work to the Lesotho National Museum, to the country, to the continent, and for the world to sort of imbibe and appreciate. And let's just hope that, there will be more interest in Mr. Ramakatane going forward.
Thanks, Paul. That's been really interesting. Well, I think we'll leave it there. I really hope that the exposure of this work will gain some momentum. And yeah, best of luck with your future projects.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks very much for your interest.
You're well. Thanks everybody for watching, and please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.